Okay, so here's the quick agenda for today. So this is going to be all about how do you bring an idea to life, this presentation. I think this is a super important topic, especially during Startup Week, that I want to kind of bring to you guys today and tell you how I use certain frameworks or how in my past experience, how I've went about starting an idea and bringing some structure to it. So first off, I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Shawn Thompson. I graduated IST in 2016. In the design development phase section. And at that point in time, they didn't really have like the HCD path that I believe you guys have now, which I think super cool that HCD path's available, because if that was available when I was in school, I 100% would have went that route. I kind of did like my own HCI path basically during that time. It took try to take all the design courses and absorb all the design material I could. So after I graduated Penn State, I went on to go do some UX consulting while I was working on my first startup, which I'll kind of get into in the next slide. And that UX design consulting, my first startup, kind of led me to where I'm at today at Microsoft, where I'm a PM. And at Microsoft, what I kind of focus on right now is doing AI at the edge. Some of you folks may not be familiar with the edge computing. Some of you may be. But I highly suggest looking into it. I'll give you the quick overview of what edge computing is. It's really about, there's all these devices that are kind of out in the wild, from like cameras, like video cameras, listening devices that sit out in like, retail stores or houses that process data back and forth and send it, either store it locally on the device or they send it back to the cloud for whatever processing, right? What my team does is we build platforms to enable those devices to be intelligent and allow people to do AI on top of them. So that's kind of what I do at Microsoft. And then I also have a company called Solve Tomorrow, which in this company, we focus on helping students kind of find their fit in industry. And we do this by helping you get real world experience, basically. So last year we had a pretty cool summer internship where we had 43 IST students participate, and we partnered with 2 startups in Silicon Valley to basically solve 2 design thinking projects, which I can dive a little bit deeper into a little bit later. But it's really about, it's hard to kind of figure out what you want to do when you graduate. And I think the best way to do that is just go out and get experience and like try out different paths. And that's really what Solve Tomorrow is all about, is helping students have the space to kind of be creative and figure out the different paths there are in industry. Okay, so you're seeing on the slide, you're seeing 3 logos, and these 3 logos are kind of in like chronological order because those are the 3 startups I've worked on since I was actually in college to today. So the first one is Descomp. The second one is a company called Up2, and then the last one's called Solve Tomorrow, which you guys just heard a little bit about. I want to start with Descomp first because this one to me is like special because it was the first kind of like independent project company that I started and recruited my friends to help me with. So Descomp is basically what it was a project to help design students get portfolio work. When I was in college, I was having a hard time, like in my interviews, kind of talking about these different like industry design projects, because my internship I took like didn't really have too much to do with UX design. It was an enterprise architect role at an insurance company, and I didn't get to do too much design. So when I was trying to become a designer and get a full-time design job after college, when I was in these interviews, I didn't really have a portfolio to kind of discuss. So I wanted to figure out how can I, help enhance my portfolio. So I saw this pain point where there was these nonprofits that had like amazing missions and, initiatives that they were driving, but their digital like footprint did not do a good job of telling their story because like maybe they didn't have the technology resources, or maybe they didn't have the bandwidth or resources from a funding perspective to go actually execute on these. And I also saw this gap between college students who are looking to get actually industry experience. So basically I created Descomp to help solve that. And so what Descomp's mission was, it was these 24-hour design challenges that a nonprofit would propose the design challenge their company is facing, whether it's a website or app design, and then the college students would go out and actually solve these design challenges over that 24-hour period. And at the end of it, college students would have portfolio work where they actually partnered closely with that nonprofit stakeholder to get the requirements and actually build out a prototype. And the nonprofit could pick the best design that they could actually potentially go implement at the end of the day. So it was kind of a win-win for both companies. And at this point in time, I started this when I was a senior, like kind of towards like the last semester of my senior year. And I recruited two of my friends from IST to help me work on this project. And then we graduated and things kind of, we all moved to different cities. So I worked on this for like 6 months afterwards, but ended up actually stopping work on it just kind of due to like some personal things that I needed to focus in on at that time. But during that whole transition, I actually ended up moving to Chicago to do UX design consulting to kind of help pay my student loans off in the meantime, while still trying to, scratch that entrepreneurship itch. And all during that, I was actually getting recruited by Microsoft too, which kind of transitioned me into getting a role at Microsoft. Initially in UI, UX consulting as well, because I already had experience. I had built out my portfolio and there was an opening for that position. But I was only in that role for like 5 to, I think 6.5 months I was in that role. And then I ended up switching teams to product management. And I can kind of get into that in a bit, but I want to focus more in on entrepreneurship. So within that first couple of months in my new product management role, I actually met one of my good friends, Samir, and we created this company called Up2. So now on to the next startup endeavor. And it was focused on another pain point. When I moved to Seattle to work for Microsoft, I knew absolutely nobody out in Seattle. Like I didn't know anyone. I had no friends out there, no family. So it was kind of like a totally new experience for me. And I found really quickly within my transition over into that new company and that new lifestyle was like, it's really easy to kind of like feel lonely and detached. And I felt like the current social platforms didn't really help me navigate and finding like-minded peers of mine or people that wanted to kind of hang out on it like a instance or moment's notice. So that's what Up2 is all about, is like, how do you connect with the people around you like instantaneously, where you don't need like a social connection with them, like, you need to friend them or something. It's just like they're open to hang out and you can go hang out with them right now. So it's kind of like instantaneous. It's like on the whim hanging out type of thing. So focused on this company for about 1.5 years, where we actually did a successful MVP with college students at University of Washington, and also with a group of users at Microsoft and Amazon as well too. And then, passions changed. We kind of we weren't passionate about the problem we were solving anymore. So we kind of like branched off on this. And this is kind of like where, you're trying to find I was trying to find my niche, like what is really interesting to me, because solving hard problems are kind of like what drives me on the day to day. And so when something I can't see like the value in doing it, I kind of move on to the next thing. Right. So that transitioned over into the pandemic, which I took basically 1.5 years break from working on startups. I just kind of like focused in on just like the role I had at Microsoft and kind of just like hanging out with my friends and just trying to find the next thing to kind of work on. And it kind of took me back to my desk comp days where I was, just really had this passion for helping like students, because I felt the pain point of a student, because I was a student. I know what it takes to kind of transition from college into industry. And when the pandemic hit, I had so many people reaching out to me, from students to, early in career folks, just asking me like, how do I go find an internship? How do I navigate this? And obviously I didn't have a good answer for that, because, I'm not an expert on the economy and all of the job outlooks. Right. But with all of those people reaching out to me, it kind of brought up this opportunity of a problem to go solve. How can I help like these students who just lost their internships because, companies were kind of reevaluating their resourcing, and help them, get value out of this upcoming summer where there was a lot of uncertainty. So I looked at it as a problem to go solve. And that's how I came up with Solve Tomorrow. It's like, I wanted to find a way to help these students be able to get experience, because I just truly believe experience is one of the best ways of really finding out what you want to do, and also just a way to be more creative. You just have to keep trying new things to figure out where you fit best at. And I felt like that summer of last year was kind of like a make or break for a lot of students because of the current outlook from the pandemic. So that's how Solve Tomorrow came about. So that was kind of like the 5 to 10 minute spiel on like my background and the companies I've worked on and what I'm currently working on today. But I want to kind of transition now from like, okay, you had all these ideas, but how did you now take those ideas and turn them into something like that was an actual working like prototype or an actual company, right? Because that's the hard piece. So it's about bringing an idea to life and why this is important. So everyone has ideas, but not everyone puts them into action, right? So you've probably had friends or maybe even yourself. I know I've done this before. Pitch an idea, and it sounds like a really good idea, right? You're just like, yeah, this is like the next Facebook, or this is the next, Snapchat, whatever, right? But it's just an idea until you put some action to it, right? So that person that's proposed that new idea to you, you might talk to them 3 months later and they made no progress. So that idea is just living out there in the open space. It never actually had any initiative put to it. So it's not able to make an impact. So this is a super basic statement, but it's really important that when you have an idea, if you want to, an idea is just an idea until you put action to it, right? So how do you put your ideas into action? So I kind of this is not like the entire list, but these are 3 things that I try to think about when putting an idea into action. The first one is like the most simple step. You have to start like somewhere, right? You have to take action on it. You have to move it from an idea either to a concept or to research. You have to do something. It can't just stay as an idea and no effort put on it whatsoever. The next piece, which I think is the most important piece, is believing in yourself. You will get thousands, hundreds to thousands of people telling you that it's not a good idea to go start this, right? If you go survey maybe 100 people, they might all tell you like you're wasting your time on a problem, right? But that's where it's really important to believe in the mission of what you're trying to do and also believe in yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, like no one is pushing you to drive this, right? You're not like getting paid to do this most likely. So you have to kind of find the initiative in yourself and believe in yourself to push the idea through. The next piece is super important. It's something I learned a lot like towards the end of my college career and until when I got into industry. And that's learning from others. It's really easy to like be in class and like take in the perspectives of your professors, right? Because they have like super great knowledge in the space that they're teaching, right? But you have to reflect on that also. So like when someone gives you feedback, it's not always just like in one ear and then like kind of just leave it. You have to also reflect on it. So that's what it really takes to learn from others, is getting that feedback or getting that knowledge and then reflecting on it and applying it to your own experiences. So that's something you'll learn in the startup space, that you just really need to learn how to really take feedback, not personally, but take it in a way that you can actually learn and grow from it. So this is a really just like simple framework that I've been using since maybe sophomore to junior year of college, that I learned actually at Penn State, that I just use to solve my day-to-day human-centric problems. And I'm not going to get into the details of it because you guys might already be super familiar with this framework, but it's how I bring structure to my ideas. And that's through the design thinking method, right? Pretty much every problem, there's some person or dog or whatever at the other end of it. It's human centric, it's animal centric, right? There's some other user at the end of it, right? So it's really important to make sure you're empathizing with that end user first, right? When you're kind of getting this idea, because that person could be you, right? Like that you're solving the problem for. Like for my desktop company, I was the user initially, but after talking to my peers, I realized I'm not the only user, right? Like a lot of my other friends were dealing with the exact same problem I was, and they gave me new perspectives on it. And I was able to identify new pain points. So empathizing with whoever your user set is super important into structuring an idea and turning it into something more than an idea, right? The next piece is, once you have a good idea of like who your users are, the pain points behind them, and what the problem is, you need to make sure you have a scope and you can define those that problem around those user needs, those user pain points. This is a really important thing, because if you don't do this well, you will end up building a product that might take you 10 years to build out because it's so out of scope, right? There's so many nuances to the features or ideas you're trying to put into it, right? So defining and scoping it is super important. The next piece is to be creative and ideate, right? So like once you have that problem definition defined around those user pain points, this is where you can take your idea and really be creative with it, but you need to be able to bring it back to that definition and that pain point for that end user. And then this is probably the most important outside of empathizing with your user, and that's prototyping and MVPing. Like, in order to make sure that this idea that you've now turned into an actual concept or MVP is valuable to that user set or that pain point that you had defined, you need to get it in front of that user set and start getting feedback immediately. So you might have heard of paper prototyping, or like, building like a box mock-up if you're like doing a hardware design, right? But it's just important that you get the concept out in front of your users and start getting that feedback super early, and so you can iterate and start building on those pain points to make sure you have that product fit. Because getting product market fit is really hard. Like, it's a really hard thing to do. But the best way to do it is to make sure you understand your users and you get prototypes and MVPs in front of them in order to make sure that you'll eventually get there if you keep doing that. And then lastly, you just got to keep testing these out, like in the real world. That's kind of, prototype and testing, they kind of go together, but have strategic test plans, right? Measure the strategy against something, right? Have KPIs, right? You want to strategize about what you're trying to prototype to, right? So it's not like just throwing something in front of a user. It's also having a strategy on why you're putting it in front of the user. And that's pretty much it. Like, that's how I bring an idea to life, is through that design thinking method. That's my favorite methodology when doing human-centric product design, but there's other ones out there, right? This is not the end all be all, but it's what I've used to take any idea I have and I bring it to life. And I even use it like on the day-to-day to solve kind of like basic problems, right? One thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this is like, why am I in a car, right? So back in October of 2020, during the pandemic, I just was stuck in my Seattle apartment because of COVID, social distancing, and kind of all the restrictions. And I just was doing the same routine every single day, getting out of my bed, going to my desk, working all day at my desk, taking a break to maybe go cycle or run or do some physical activity, right? Eat dinner, and then go back to my desk and continue working, and then start all over the next day. I was in that kind of cycle I was not feeling creative whatsoever, because I wasn't experiencing anything new. I wasn't meeting new people. I wasn't seeing new things. I was just stuck in my kind of 300 square foot office, right? So what I needed to change was I needed to find a way to get new experiences, obviously safely because, of COVID, but I still wanted to find a way to experience new things in kind of a manner I could continue to bring creativity, continue to bring perspective and new perspectives to my thoughts, and diversification to my thoughts. And so what I decided to do is lease out my condo in Seattle and live out of a Airstream for the next year to 2 years, just trying to travel the country while working remote to kind of get new perspectives on life, but also see new things so I could be more creative, and I wasn't doing the same routine every day. So I really don't have a routine on my day-to-day. I mean, I have meetings that are on my calendar, but I try and keep things super flexible so I can be as creative as possible, right? And I've been doing it for now 4 months basically, and my creativity has shot up significantly because I just don't feel like I'm in a rut anymore. A lot of it's just super mental. So whatever you have to do to be inspired, you got to do it, right? But it's just that was an idea. A lot of people might take that idea and just say it'd be cool to live out of an Airstream, but I figured out what it took to actually go execute on that, right? And that's really what is the most important, is how do you go, once you have an idea that you really believe in and you are passionate about it, how do you go about actually executing on it, right? So That's kind of the background about me. That's what I've worked on up to this point in my early career. And I hope some of my experiences and background has brought some insight to you, or at least kind of has your mind thinking a little bit differently. So at this point, I'm open to doing Q&A. If anyone has any questions for me, I'll stop the screen share. I'll share out the slide deck afterwards. You can kind of use that one slide design thinking slide as like a reference point going forward on your ideas to concepts. But yeah, I'll go back on video so we can do a Q&A.
Thanks, Shawn. So if you have any questions, please post on the chat. And I should also add that the design thinking method that Shawn showed, yeah, that's like a really flexible, a great set of methodologies. And if you're interested in that, you might want to check out the IST 331 Foundation of Human-Centered Design. That course talks quite a bit about the design thinking process, how to take different steps. And as Shawn mentioned, it's very flexible, not just for system development or product development. You can use it for like essentially almost every tasks in your life.
Yeah, if it's human related, you definitely can. And that's kind of like the cool part about it, is because it's just all about focusing it on your user set, right? And that's what a lot of people in product development don't do. They just develop in a vacuum and they create amazing technology. Like no one questions the capability of how technical someone can be, right? But if you don't have a user to actually benefit from that, it's pointless, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions.
All right, we have one from Jimmy. Can everyone see the questions, or should we say that question out loud?
I'll read it out loud if you don't mind.
Right.
Yes, please.
Okay, what would you say is the best way to portray UX projects you have done in internships, but can't show what you've done due to being an internal system?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I've struggled with this. I'm even struggling with it in a current project I'm working on, right? Because it's tented and I can't share this info yet on it. I would say sometimes you can't, there's no answer to that, right? It's just blatantly you cannot talk about it, right? Because due to the nature of the NDA you have with your employment agreement or whatever, contract is that's binding you from sharing info on that. So sometimes there's just not an answer to it. You just can't do it, right? If there is, oh, sorry, I'm hearing some echo. Okay, I think it's gone. So the one thing is, if there is like some high level topics you can bring up or concepts you can talk about within it, like you might not have the actual mock-ups or wireframes, but if you're able to kind of derive the concepts you learned from that, from like a UX standard, that might be enough for you to put a story together to tell your impact story on it, right? Or how you learned or how you grew as an individual. You might not be able to share the final designs, but if you can find what concepts you derived from it and then put those into like, hypothetical scenarios in relation, not in relation, but in perspective of what you actually worked on in that other project without kind of disclosing the nuances of the other project, I would say that might be the best route to go. And that's what I've done in the past, is I've just like, when an interviewer had asked me about like concepts that I can't discuss, I talk more about, what are some of the skills that I learned from that project, or what are some of the UX concepts I used, and put them in a different perspective to show that I know I have the knowledge and I have the experiences, but I just can't talk about the actual end product.
Thanks, Shawn.
Great question.
Here's another question for you. Once you had an idea you knew was viable, how did you go about determining your budget and finding the right people to make it work?
Yep. Two really good kind of resourcing questions in that. The first one is about budget, right? So budget's going to change based on, your personal circumstances of how much money you can put towards a project yourself. And then number two is how many people can you sell on your idea to basically go bring it to life. The cool part about software is, like, if you have a software skill set, you actually really don't need a ton of money to go get something working, right? Because you can build it yourself. Like with hardware, it's a little bit different because you actually have to, prototype it, and you have to go through manufacturing, and there's a lot of money and costs involved in developing hardware. But software, there's a lot of money involved in it, but you can get a prototype out pretty quickly if you have the skill set, or if your team members have the skill set, which brings me to the next point. Recruiting a team is really important. And a lot of my ideas and startups have failed, honestly, because of our team just losing interest, or maybe not having the best skill sets for it, right? Excuse me. So sometimes it's challenging because you want to work with your friends, right? But your friends might not always have the skill sets you need to go through with a project. If they have the passion to go solve that problem, I don't always think it's a bad thing to bring them on, right? Because if you want people that are going to be passionate about solving the problem with you, because a lot of times, probably 99% of the times, no one's paying you to do it. You're doing it in your own time. It might be after class work, or it might be after your day-to-day job, which is what I do. So it takes a lot of motivation to kind of keep you going down these paths, right? And you got to be able to accept failure. So you want a team with you that is willing to be on that same path with you. So that's super important, that they believe in the mission, they believe in the problem you're solving. The next piece is kind of like finding the right folks to fit the needs that you might not have, and can accompany your skill set, right? So maybe you might be a really good developer, but you're not really that great at designing, or you're not really that great at pitching and selling the mission, right? So you need to find people who can accompany or complement those skill sets. And that's where it takes being able to articulate and kind of motivate people to come join you, right? Which is a skill in itself. So it takes some time, it takes practice, but that's how you need to kind of go about it. You need to kind of think about what your budget is, how much can you afford, can you go get funding, right? And from the team perspective, you need to think about what do you need to go bring this product or idea to life. And if you can do it yourself, more power to you, but usually a team is more powerful if you get new perspectives and more diverse thoughts coming in, and that means a lot in product development. So find out where your gaps are, and then you just it takes work. You have to go recruiting. You have to find people that buy into what you're doing.
Thanks, Shawn. Here's the next question. What drives you to work as an entrepreneur?
That's a really good question. It's not really entrepreneurship that drives me. It's honestly more about solving problems that are interesting to me, right? I get to solve cool problems at work, but sometimes the things that I'm interested in don't always coincide with what I'm working on at Microsoft. Just because, maybe it's a totally different field, right? Or a totally different space. And I want to go solve those problems. So, the only way to do it is just go out and recruit a team to go solve those. So what drives me is just honestly the problem itself. That's really what drives me to go solve these and spend my time working on them.
This student was wondering if you could talk a bit more about your involvement in management versus development versus design at different points in your career, and which of these you have enjoyed the most.
So I won't talk much about development because my development life, me being a developer, is very short, to be honest. I kind of I know how to do web development, and I use it for prototyping, high fidelity prototyping sometimes, but I really don't do any development these days. I can talk more about design and product management though, because I think they're a really strong complement to each other. I think there's somebody's phone going off in the background. Okay, so for design, I would say for design, what I've kind of taken away from design the most is kind of how you think about an idea and how you approach it, right? I don't love doing like mock-ups and Figma or SketchUp. Like that's not my passion. I don't love actually going and doing that work. That's why I actually transitioned into product management, because I didn't love doing the actual execution of the UX, right? I like strategizing about the user, and I like strategizing about how we display whatever we're trying to put in front of the user. But when it comes to actually doing the prototyping, I don't love doing that piece. It's not something I'm passionate about, but it's a strong skill set to have, because then you can visualize your ideas. So that takes me to product management. And the thing I really enjoy about product management is the strategy behind it, right? Because product management is super similar to entrepreneurship. It's just, you might be at a big company doing your like kind of entrepreneurship through product management, right? At a big tech company, you're probably working on a smaller feature set just because there's so many people using that product. You need so many different individuals looking at it. But if you're at a startup or like a really small company, a product manager might own the entire product itself, right? Like, so let's use Zoom, for example, right? Like Zoom's a huge product. So there's a ton of PMs and devs working on this. But for a small startup like Up2 that I created, right? Like I was the PM, and then I had a developer working with me on it, right? So I owned the entire feature set and design of that product, right? Because we didn't have our individual designer. And where compared to Zoom as a PM, I might only own like one or two features. So the reason why I think design and product management is such a strong, these two roles kind of coincide with each other, and having skills in both areas allows you to be strategic and not only just like the role itself, but also in solving ideas or solving problems, is that when you can look at something through a design lens and a user lens first, it allows you to be more strategic on the user pain points, and then creating features around those user pain points. It allows you to kind of empathize better. And I think a lot of PMs these days are becoming more design centric, which is why I think design is a great background for PM. But it's really important that when you are strategizing about a product, that you really understand who you're strategizing for that product. But great question.
Thanks, Shawn. Here's another question. What are some tips and tricks that you can share about your research process to determine what you need to get it done, like with your current car travel plan?
Yeah, so for the lifestyle I'm living, that's honestly a little bit more on a whim. I'm not strategizing as much on like where I'm traveling on a like week to week. I kind of just go with how I feel on that one. That's a little bit more intuition, to be completely honest. But for like taking an idea and strategizing and getting the research I need, that all starts with who am I solving the problem for? So like, let me just use my DesComp, for example, just because I think you guys can relate to that one. When I first started kind of identifying this pain point for myself, I was kind of just like running through these questions in my own head, right? Like, why is this important? Why do I need a portfolio? How do I go get a portfolio? What's the value of a portfolio, et cetera, right? I was kind of running through all these different things. Once I kind of did that with myself, I realized, okay, let me go talk to my friends about it, right? Because they're in the same situation as me, right? I knew they were looking for jobs. They kind of, if you took my persona, like who I am and what I was trying to do at that point in time, I know I could kind of replicate that with some of my peers and in my classes, right? So it was just a natural step to go talk to them about it and get their feedback. But at that point in time, it's just Penn State, right? And unfortunately, even though Penn State is like super diverse, but in a ton of different students and backgrounds, right? It's still in Pennsylvania, and we're kind of all living the same like lifestyle, right? Like we're going into the same IST courses, and we're going out at the same places, kind of like hanging out at the same spots, right? So it was interesting to me to go talk to a different universities and like a similar persona, right? So I actually had some friends at Ohio State, right? So I went in, chatted with them about it, right, to kind of get their perspective. And I learned a lot from talking to these different user sets. And what it was able to allow me to do is kind of define what that persona is. And that's when I realized that this idea was more scalable than just myself, right? So that was kind of my research method on empathizing. And reflecting on it today, I feel like I can articulate it better because I've worked with design thinking now for 5 years. But back then I couldn't articulate it probably as well, just because I was new to design thinking and it just takes practice. So it's going to be trial and error too. I want to make that clear. It's not going to be like, you're just going to go out, nail your persona immediately. It takes a lot of trial and error in iterating.
So Shawn, I have a related question. So how do you select ideas? I'm sure that you have lots of interests and like lots of different ideas. So how do you come up with, or how do you evaluate the ideas to kind of fix on one?
Yeah, really good question. So yeah, I think anyone just has new ideas on the day-to-day, right? And it's really easy to go spend a lot of time on one of those ideas, right? One of the kind of litmus tests I do myself is like, how long does this idea stick in my head? Because I'm one of those people who can have blinders on really quickly, right? I can be super passionate about something one week and then next week not be as passionate about it. So I kind of let it sit and like marinate in my head for like at least a week or two, right? To kind of feel it out. Like, is this something I'm really passionate about going to pursue? And that's one of those like intuition things as well too. You just kind of got to feel it out. It's hard to kind of quantify that one a bit. But once I really feel it out, or, and sometimes also, let me add to that, it could be like, some other force bringing it onto you as well too. Like with the Solve Tomorrow thing, like that was a force I just felt because I could immediately empathize with the problem, right? Like when I heard these students were losing their internships, and which could have potentially affect their, job perspective initially right out of college, that just resonated with me immediately, right? So I knew I could take action on that one. But some of my other ideas, it takes a little bit of time to marinate. Once they've marinated and I feel like, okay, yeah, this is something interesting, I actually go talk to a bunch of people about the idea. So I don't just like immediately put action to it. I just start telling people about my idea. I know a lot of people are afraid to go do this because, they might think someone would steal their idea or their idea is not fleshed out enough, but you'll have a set of people in your life that you'll trust, you value their opinion, and then you just go bring these up to them and get their honest feedback. You want people that will actually give you honest feedback and not just like tell you, this is an amazing idea. You want someone who you can trust and give you honest feedback. Once I've kind of vetted it through that group of individuals, at that point in time, I do the evaluation, right? And honestly, I've started looking at ideas that I actually invest a lot of time in on 3-year terms, basically. So instead of looking at it from like a 3-month, 6-month, year term that I used to do, I now look at it 3 years. So I kind of just like think in my head, how could I work on something for 3 years and evolve it for 3 years? And if I can't put anything together for that from like a vision perspective, I don't work on it unless it's really an outside force forcing it on me, like, lack of internships or something where I think there's a way to make quick impact, right? But I try and look at it from a longer vision to see if it's something worth working on.
Here's another question, Shawn. How much time do you spend on entrepreneurial ventures versus the time you spend at your day-to-day job?
That's a great question. I think sometimes, work is really busy. So I spend like, sometimes 50, 60 hours a week on my day-to-day job, right? But, it's just finding a balance, right? So I don't really have a number on it, but I try and spend my weekends honestly working on side projects or my entrepreneurship efforts. I like to have my Sundays like my free day where I don't do anything work related to just kind of unwind. But I try and spend some afternoons working on my projects, and I like to spend my full Saturday working on my projects. And that's why it's important to be passionate and really understand where you want to go with something, because if you don't feel that or you don't have that, it's going to be really easy to, prioritize other things on a Saturday, right?
Thanks. Here's another question. This person's saying, great presentation. I'm currently in IST and also aspiring PM. I feel that I'm not extremely proficient in one area, but have knowledge and understanding of the area's technical design, UX, and data analyst. Should I focus on becoming more proficient in any of those areas in order to become a great PM?
Yeah, great question. So the way I look at early in career PMs are like, especially at a big tech company, I'll speak to those. And then, I can't really speak to smaller companies because I haven't experienced it. But like if you have some area of focus that you're just super passionate about, whether that's like AI or if that's like user experience design, if you just have a focus area where you can go grow a skill set, like it's super valuable to go dive into that, right? And really learn that space, because as a PM, like your job's not just to strategize, it's also to be able to articulate, the vision to other stakeholders, right? And that stakeholder could be like a vice president, that stakeholder could be a super low level developer. And the more technical expertise you have in that area, it actually allows you to communicate more strongly with your developers, right? Because you can then empathize with them. I'm using that term empathize again because it can be used here, right? You need to kind of be able to understand who your audiences are and who your stakeholders are and be able to know what works well in the communication spectrum with them so you can communicate effectively, right? So I think if you have a focus area that you're really interested in, like go down that rabbit hole, learn a lot about it, because this is a time you can do that, right? The next thing is, though, I really feel like to be a good PM, like it just takes you solving product problems, right? So that's why I like really vouch for experience, because you don't need you don't need a job to go solve product problems, right? Like you can look at an application and solve product problems if your mind thinks critically like that, right? If you think about things like when you experience something that you think's just not right, like if you analyze it and think about how you can solve that problem, you don't have to spend months or years or whatever working on it, but if you spend a weekend on it, right, you're going to start thinking more product focused, right? So I think getting experience in product solving product problems is really important. And then if you have a startup idea or you have just a project you want to go work on, recruit a team together and just start doing it, right? Because you're going to realize whether that startup is $1 billion company or just like something that doesn't go anywhere. You're going to learn so much from that experience that you will have amazing stories to tell to recruiters when you are interviewing for PM. Like for example, when I was interviewing at Microsoft, like I spoke about DesComp the entire time. And it mainly is because it was what I was super passionate about, and it's what I felt like I had the most impact on. But that was something that I just did on the side when I was a college student, right? So by taking that effort, going out and trying to actually solve product problems or solve like human-centric problems and create products around that, I think you'll be super well off.
Okay, another question. Is DesComp still active, or are there any references out there to have a design mission in order to create a good portfolio?
Good question. DesComp is not active anymore. As far as the competition out there, there are definitely a ton of opportunities out there. I would say hackathons in themselves kind of like Hack for Good. Like there's a ton of like initiatives out there that partner with nonprofits to go do this, right? Like Solve Tomorrow in a way where I created my internship this last summer. A lot of it had to do with the knowledge I learned and the information I learned from DesComp, right? Where it's like, how do we get college student internship opportunities? Well, it's we didn't partner with nonprofits, we partnered with startups, right? But there's a lot of examples out there of ways to go get portfolio work. Honestly, before I even started the actual company DesComp, I actually made a list of 100 nonprofits in PA, and I cold called every single one of those to see if they'd be interested in partnering with me, right? And letting me solve their problem. And then once I realized like 60% of that out of that 100 wanted resources to help them solve design problems, that's when I said, okay, let's see if we can scale this, right? So if you want to build out your portfolio, like I don't even think you need to be in a program like DesComp. You could honestly go out and just like start cold calling these companies themselves and see if they'll let you freelance.
Do you find that it is hard to solve problems that you can't empathize with?
Absolutely. I actually feel like it's nearly impossible to solve a problem you can't empathize with, because I don't know if you'll actually solve the right problem if you can't empathize with the pain points of that problem. You'll probably solve a different problem, actually.
If you know you want to build a competing product to something that is already successful, how do you go about talking to people about that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Sometimes there's just huge companies out there like that will kind of overpower the space. Like social is definitely a really good one, right? There's like there's a few like apps out there that just kind of dominate the social space, right? So where I've seen other products find success is finding little niche pain points within those and just like going full out on solving that pain point, right? It's really hard to do still, like, don't get me wrong, but like you need to be able to do a competitive analysis on like what is that product missing and can you highlight one of those pain points and understand the market of that pain point too, right? Is that pain point just affecting you, or is that pain point affecting 100,000 users, 10,000 users, 1,000 users, right? Because if it's a big competitor you're dealing with, like you're thinking about massive scale at that point in time. So you have to find something that would really help narrow down that set of users. And I don't know if you guys have listened to Reid Hoffman's like Masters of Scale before, but you should definitely go check out that podcast because he talks to a lot of these really successful entrepreneurs, and a lot of times they talk about how they found their first set of users who love their products, right? He kind of uses this thing where it's like it's more important to have like 10 users that love your product compared to like 20 users or 100 users that just like slightly like your product, right? So if you can find a niche in that area where your competitor is not hitting it, and you can get users to advocate for you on that, like definitely that might be a way to go break into that space, but it will be hard for sure, just like anything in entrepreneurship.
Here's another question. Sorry, Saeed, go ahead.
Yeah. Shawn, you partially talked about this, but I'm curious if you have any suggestions in terms of strategies for someone, say an undergrad from IST, who is trying to create or extend their profile.
Yeah, sorry, it broke up. Did you say extend your portfolio at the end?
Yeah, so creating or extending their portfolio, say someone in a junior or already starting senior.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like there's so many things in this world where the digital, also, sorry, I'm getting a really bad glare. There's a lot of digital problems these days, right? Like as we're in this space of remote work and sharing content online, there's a huge demand for new ways to present that, whether it's through a website. And you can like UX design is not just about creating websites and apps, by the way. UX design is literally anything you're designing for an experience for that user, right? It can be a poster. It could honestly be a social media post. There's a lot of thought that needs to be taken into what you're trying to evoke in your end user, right? And you can, shape that story on your portfolio however you like, right? Like it's not just about web design and app design. So I just want to, kind of broaden that a bit. But I think with all the opportunities out there today, like you just need to like go approach people, right? Like if you have something that you feel like you can bring value to, propose it to them, right? Like a lot of times you're going to get no, right? Like I'm sure a lot of you probably went on LinkedIn, messaged someone, and then no response ever, right? That happens all the time. So you got to change up your methods. But I would say as a student, a lot of times companies and nonprofits will empathize with you because you're going out of your way to kind of like build your skill set and kind of play that card when you're trying to get work, right? But I think getting freelance work is my favorite way of trying to build out my portfolio. Because once you have freelance work, and also, use like tools like Dribbble. Dribbble is a tool that I love using because there's a lot of great designers on that tool who share their work. You can get inspiration, and then you can also get gigs and stuff from that. So Dribbble's a really popular site for that. I think Reddit's also a really cool place to kind of test out users. Clubhouse, if you have an invitation to Clubhouse. Behance is an Adobe product that allows you to share out your portfolio. You just want to be a part of these design communities, right? Because these design communities is where you're going to start collaborating and getting in front of other people that are solving similar problems, and they can potentially help you out with that. But yeah, that's a really good question.
So Shawn, you also talked about like having a time span of 3 years that you use to figure out
Yep.
if an idea is worth pursuing. So what are the strategies you use to make sure that you are motivated throughout this like time phase? Because it could be like if you're just working on a product by yourself, that could be lonely. I'm sure that they could be frustrating sometimes. So what are the strategies or tools that you like use to make sure that you are making progress?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's days every single, like, when you wake up, you might have like a long day ahead of you, right? And there's always 1,000 tasks you need to work on in a day. So you have to have motivation. And to be honest, I think anybody would lie to you if they said they woke up every single day motivated to go solve their problem. They might be motivated, but they might not progress. Like, let me just use an example of like my inspiration to go into the tech space. So Steve Jobs is someone like I idolized as a kid, basically. And he comes, like, if you read his biographies or and anything about Steve Jobs, he comes off as this guy who like just had this amazing vision and just had blinders on and went full force into it. But if you read some of the like memoirs from his friends and his close friends, people will tell you he's actually a really lazy guy, right? He spent a lot of his time lounging around in space, basically to get inspiration, right? And just allow his mind to unleash. Because when you're kind of like in that day-to-day rut of like, I need to be doing this, obviously there's sometimes you have to do that. I just want to caveat that. But if you're always doing that, it's going to be hard to kind of be creative in that space. And you need to be super creative in a startup space, right? Now to the next part, if you're the only person working on it, that's where it gets really tricky, because at that point in time, like you're basically saying like, this obligation's to me, the responsibility's on me, and you have to hold yourself accountable. When you have a team, your team can help hold you accountable in a way, right? But when you're working by yourself, you have to hold yourself accountable every single day to go and work on this thing, right? Just like, I'll use a gym, like working out example, right? Like if you want to get fit or if you want to have higher cardio endurance, right? Like you have to hold yourself accountable to train every single day. It's the same exact thing in product development. So that's where like working with a team, if you can get a team to surround you that are passionate about the problem, they'll help motivate you. Their ideas, their perspectives will help motivate you, right? If you're working by yourself, you need to find ways in that space to motivate yourself, get inspiration. And I know it's not like an easy answer, but like it's kind of open-ended, but once you start doing it, you'll know what I'm talking about.
So sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I relate to it so much. I have to do something else to come up with ideas and keep progressing. What's your advice for setting milestones? I have been connecting with mentors, advisors, and other resources to keep myself accountable along with the team.
Absolutely. So this is a really simple way, I think, to look at milestones. And sometimes you can be super aggressive, and you want to kind of find a balance here. But so I want to caveat that. But if you set a goal to be 3 years, you'll take 3 years to build that product out, right? But if you set 5 months to build out that product, right? Like you might be able to build out that product in 5 months that you thought might have taken 3 years, right? So based on you have to be realistic in scoping what your team can actually build out. Sometimes it's super unrealistic. And if you put unrealistic goals in front of a team, you can demotivate them. But it's also, a way to potentially motivate them if you can scope them in a place where it's like, I really think we can do this within this time span, but maybe you have to put that milestone in front of them to kind of get them to think that they can do that, right? Or get yourself to believe that you can do that, right? Be aggressive on it. But you need to set milestones. Like it's really important to help you progress through the product. And you need to be able to change milestones based on feedback you get from your users or from any other source that you feel like might have a strong impact. So there's kind of this balance that you're going to have to figure out when building a product. Is like, you might get all this great feedback on something, but it might not be the right time to implement it, right? So you also have to weigh the pros and cons of these milestones you're setting and if they're worth changing, right? So for example, let me just put this in a scenario for you. So if I'm building out a piece of software, right? and this piece of software is 70% through, right? And we think we can build this out in the next 2 months, and we'll be 100% where we can get in front of our users as V1. We ship V1, right? But we get this feedback from like a lot of our users saying that, you know, we really need this next feature to be in V1, right? But that's going to push our product development back like 5 months to build out that feature. At that point in time, that's where you have to make a product decision on, is it worth evaluating and trying to iterate and pivot to build that feature into V1, or can that be a V2 thing, right? Like that's where you have to really take in that user feedback, do the pros and cons of your team. And sometimes it's not going to be clear cut. It's going to be, you have to be logical, or you have to, you know, even sometimes gamble on these things too, right? Like whether you're going to bring them to life or not earlier. So I hope that helps. I kind of touched on a few different areas about milestones, but I think they're all important to take into consideration when scoping and setting milestones and pivoting when milestones, when new ideas come that could potentially change milestones.
Shawn, do you want to talk a little bit more about the Solves Tomorrow incubation? I know that you mentioned a couple times, but I see that you are still accepting ideas. Is this going to be a thing for, say, next summer? And
Absolutely.
What types of ideas are you looking for?
Yeah, so we're pivoting a little bit this summer based on our last cohort from last summer. We're going to take a smaller group, and I think it's because what we're going to be offering this time around, I think, is more valuable to students. So just kind of reiterate what we did last summer. Last summer, we partnered with two really two Series A and B startups, basically out in Silicon Valley, to basically solve problems their companies were facing, right? And each cohort, and we had basically 9 teams within our cohort that would go solve these in like a product manner. And it was a really awesome experience, I think, for the students. But this year, we've learned a lot through talking to students on what would be valuable to them and keeping them motivated, right? Because we're not, by the way, this isn't a paid program. You don't pay to get in this program. We don't pay you to be in it, right? We're just creating the opportunities for you to be able to get experience, right, in a structured manner. But when I reflect on what I thought was most valuable out for my external work outside of my classroom work, was kind of creating DesComp and being passionate about my own project and pursuing that. I thought that was the most valuable external experience I had, way more valuable than my first internship, to be completely honest. I wanted to survey students to see if they thought the same and if that's something to push them along. Because I think this concept of how to take an idea and turn it into a concept is really a hard thing that students struggle with. They have really good ideas, are really creative, but getting mentorship and getting the right, resources to help you push that idea from like an idea to an MVP is a really hard thing to do. And so that's what Solve Tomorrow is going to do this summer. Is this summer we're going to take between 8 to 10 teams or individuals, and we're going to have an idea pitch, basically. So the way you apply is you first, right now, you put in your email. We'll give you a link afterwards, but you go put in your email, and then we'll basically set up a sync with you, and we'll hear you pitch an idea that you want to go work on. This idea could be honestly anything. It could be an app. It could be a piece of hardware. It could be a new piece of clothing, whatever you want to do, right? Whatever idea you have, we're going to hear those, and the best 8 to 10 ideas we're going to take, and we're going to walk you through an 8-week sprint to help you get from concept idea to MVP. So when you leave, you're going to basically have an MVP to take away from it. So think about it at kind of like an accelerator, but I'm going to bring in a bunch of my like tech friends and my industry expert friends to kind of help guide you and get perspectives on your products, right? And we're going to help get you from basically concept to MVP. So if you're interested, definitely apply. We haven't confirmed our slots yet. We're still hearing ideas. I think we'll probably close that out by mid-April. And by the way, if you have an internship or something this summer, you can still do this. It's probably like a 10-hour to 15-hour a week commitment. Obviously, you want to spend 40 to 60 hours a week, super encouraged, right? But from like the structure of like getting in front of resourcing and like mentors and industry experts, I think it's probably about a 10-hour commitment a week for that. Yeah, thanks, Syed, for calling that out. I think this is a great place for people that are interested in taking their ideas and getting some help taking those. Oh, and by the way, there's no equity or anything. I'm not taking any equity. It's purely just me wanting to hear your guys' ideas and help you guys bring them to life, because I felt like that was a hard thing that I had to learn in college.
Here's another question for you, Shawn. Would you accept an idea that has reached a prototype, but is open to rigorous customer discovery and changes from the feedback?
Absolutely, it does. So that's a good question. It doesn't have to be just an idea. If you have a product already and you need to iterate on your product, or you want to take your product further, absolutely, love to have you and pitch it to us.
All right, any other questions?
There's no questions at this time.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. So Shawn, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the class, to the IST and the broader community. Thank you so much for doing this. This is very helpful. And I certainly hope that we'll see you again in next year.
Yeah, thanks much for having me. I look forward to the time where I can come do these live in person and actually connect with you guys. So, I put my LinkedIn up earlier on the screen. If you want to connect with me and, chat offline or have any questions, feel free to follow up with me on LinkedIn, and I'll definitely try and get to those as soon as possible. And best of luck this week, and hope you guys get some more great insights from the rest of the folks speaking. Thanks again.